There is a land, very small on the map, but very big in history. A land where people have prayed for thousands of years, where kings, empires and armies have come and gone, but the fight never really stopped. Many people ask one question: why? Why has this land been fought over again and again? Why does the whole world still watch it today? This is not just a story about one country. This is a story about faith, identity, power, and a land that refuses to be forgotten. But before we begin, tell me, where are you watching this from? And what time is it in your city right now? Long before the world was divided into countries, before maps were drawn with lines and borders, before people spoke about politics or power, there existed a land that was different from all others, a land that did not become important because of gold or resources, but because of belief, a land where people did not just live, but felt something deeper, something spiritual, or something that connected them to something greater than themselves. This land was small, not rich in natural wealth, not surrounded by powerful protection, and not easy to control. Yet even in ancient times, people did not see it as just land. They saw it as something chosen, something meaningful, something that carried a story that was bigger than any one group of people. For the Jewish people, this land was not just history, it was identity. It was a promise they believed was given to them long ago, a promise that this land was meant to be their home, a place where they could live according to their beliefs, build their communities, and create a future connected to their past. And so they built kingdoms, strong and proud, where their culture and faith grew deeply rooted in the land. But history does not stay still, and power does not remain in one place forever, and soon other empires began to notice this land, not always because of its size or wealth, but because of its position, because it stood between important regions, between powerful civilizations, making it a place that many wanted to control. The land saw the arrival of different rulers, different armies, different kings, each one bringing change, each one leaving marks that would never fully disappear. And among these empires, one of the most powerful was the Roman Empire, a force that changed everything. The Romans took control of the land with strength and authority, and when the Jewish people resisted, when they tried to hold on to their identity and their independence, the response was harsh. Cities were destroyed, lives were lost, and a moment came that would change the story forever. Many Jewish people were forced to leave their homeland, pushed out of the land they believed was theirs, scattered across different parts of the world, far away from the place they once called home, and this moment became one of the most important turning points in history, because even though the people left, the connection to the land did not disappear. They carried it in their memories, in their stories, in their prayers. Generation after generation, they spoke about returning, about one day going back to the land they had lost, even when it seemed impossible, even when centuries passed without any sign of change. But the story of this land does not belong to only one group, because while one group was forced to leave, others continued to live there, and over time, new meanings were added to the land, new histories were written, new connections were formed. For Christians, this land became deeply important because it is where the life of Jesus is believed to have taken place, where events happened that shaped the faith of millions of people around the world, making the land not just a place on earth, but a place filled with spiritual significance. For Muslims, this land also holds deep meaning, especially the city of Jerusalem, which is connected to important moments in Islamic belief, a place respected, honored, and remembered in the hearts of millions, making the land important not just in history, but in daily faith and identity. Now, something powerful begins to take shape, something that would define the future of this land for thousands of years. Because this was no longer just a place where people lived, this became a land where different beliefs, different histories, and different identities all came together in one small space. And when many people feel that the same land belongs to them, not just for living, but for belief, for identity, for history, and for future, the situation becomes more than just a simple disagreement. It becomes something deeper, something emotional, something very difficult to solve. Over time, the land continued to change hands. Different empires came and went, each one leaving its influence, each one shaping the land in new ways, but none of them were able to erase what came before. None of them could remove the deep connection that people felt toward this place. The land carried memories, not just of buildings and cities, but of people, of prayers, of loss, of hope, and of a long story that refused to end. Centuries passed, and the world changed in many ways. New countries were formed, new ideas were born, technology advanced, and life moved forward. But this land remained different because its story was not finished. Far away from this land, across different parts of the world, the Jewish people continued to live, building new lives in new places, but never fully forgetting where they came from, never fully letting go of the idea that one day they might return. This idea did not disappear. Instead, it grew slowly, quietly, in the hearts of many, passed from one generation to the next, becoming stronger over time, especially during moments when life became difficult, when people faced rejection, when they felt like they did not truly belong anywhere. And as the years moved forward, something began to change. Not suddenly, not loudly, but slowly and deeply. The idea of returning to the land was no longer just a memory, it was becoming a plan. People began to think seriously about going back, about rebuilding, about starting again in the place their ancestors once lived. And this thought, this simple but powerful question, started to rise again and again. What if we go back? And as this question grew stronger, as more people began to believe in it, as hope slowly turned into action, the story of this land was about to enter a new chapter, one that would bring people back, but also bring new challenges, new tensions, and a future that would not be easy. Because the land they wanted to return to was no longer empty. And this is where everything begins to change. Because the land they wanted to return to was no longer empty, the idea of going back was no longer just a dream filled with hope. It was now a reality filled with questions, challenges, and decisions that would change the future of millions of people, not just for a few years, but for generations to come. As the 1800s moved toward their end, the world itself was changing. New ideas were spreading across Europe. People were beginning to think about identity in a new way, not just as individuals, but as nations, groups of people who shared language, culture, history, and a sense of belonging. And in this changing world, many Jewish people began to feel that they too needed a place they could truly call their own, a place where they would not be outsiders, a place where they could live without fear. Life in many parts of Europe was not easy for them. They faced discrimination. They were often treated as different, sometimes even unwanted, and during times of crisis, they were blamed for problems they did not create. And this created a deep feeling of insecurity, a feeling that no matter where they lived, they were never fully accepted, never fully safe. So the idea of returning to their historical land, the land they had spoken about for centuries, began to feel more than just emotional. It began to feel necessary. It began to feel like the only solution to a long history of struggle. This idea slowly turned into a movement that came to be known as Zionism, a movement that believed Jewish people should return to their ancestral land and build a nation where they could control their own future, protect their identity, and live without fear of being pushed out again. At first, this movement was small. Only a few people believed in it strongly enough to act on it, but over time, more and more people began to support it, And slowly, people started to make the journey back to the land. They arrived with hope, with dreams of rebuilding something that had been lost long ago. They bought land, they built small communities, they worked hard to create a new life, often in difficult conditions, facing challenges from the land itself, from limited resources, and from the uncertainty of what the future would bring. But as more people arrived, something important became clear. The land was not empty waiting to be taken. It was already home to Arab communities who had been living there for generations, people who had their own families, their own traditions, their own connection to the same land, even if their history with it was different. For them, this land was not a memory from the past. It was their present, their daily life, their home. And as new people began to settle and grow in number, it created a sense of worry, a feeling that something was changing too quickly, that their future might be at risk. At first, the interactions between the two groups were not always violent. There were moments of cooperation, moments where people tried to live side by side. But beneath the surface, tension was growing, slowly, quietly, like a storm that had not yet fully formed. Then the world entered a moment that would change everything. World War I began, a global conflict that reshaped countries, empires, and borders. And when the war ended, one of the biggest empires in the region, the Ottoman Empire, collapsed. For hundreds of years, this empire had controlled the land, and now suddenly it was gone, leaving behind a question that needed an answer. Who would control the land now? The answer came from far away, from a powerful country that had its own interests, its own plans, and its own vision for the future of the region. Britain. Britain took control of the land under what was called a mandate, meaning they were responsible for managing it, guiding it, and preparing it for the future. But the decisions they made during this time would have long-lasting effects that are still felt today. During this period, Britain made a declaration that supported the idea of creating a national home for Jewish people in the land, something that gave hope and encouragement to those who wanted to return and build a future there. But at the same time, Britain had also made promises to Arab leaders during the war, promises that suggested independence and control over lands that included this same region. Now, imagine the situation. Two different groups, both believing they had been given support, both believing they had a right to the land, and one powerful authority trying to manage both sides without fully solving the deeper problem. This created confusion, frustration, and growing mistrust. As the years passed, more Jewish people continued to arrive, especially as conditions in Europe became worse, especially during times of extreme violence and persecution, which forced many to leave their homes and search for safety wherever they could find it. The land began to change faster, communities grew, cities developed, and the balance between populations started to shift, and with every change, the tension between the communities grew stronger. For the Arab population, it began to feel like their land was being taken, that decisions were being made without their full control, that their future was becoming uncertain. For the Jewish population, it felt like they were finally returning home after centuries, building something they believed they had the right to build, creating safety after generations of fear. Both sides felt they were right. Both sides felt they were defending their future. And when two sides believe so strongly in their own truth, finding peace becomes very difficult. Protests began. Disagreements became more serious. Small conflicts started to turn into larger ones. Trust became harder to build. Fear became stronger. And slowly, the situation began to move from tension into open conflict. The world was watching, but no simple solution appeared, because this was not just about land anymore. It was about identity, history, survival, and belief, all mixed together in a way that made every decision complicated and every outcome uncertain. And as the pressure continued to grow, As more people arrived, as more voices demanded answers, the land was moving closer to a moment that would change everything forever. Because soon, a decision would be made, a decision that would divide the land itself. And once that decision was announced, there would be no turning back. And once that decision was announced, there would be no turning back, because the world was about to step into one of the most important and emotional turning points in modern history, a moment where a land that had already carried centuries of belief, memory, and tension would now be officially divided, not by nature, not by time, but by human decision. In 1947, after years of growing conflict, pressure, and uncertainty, the United Nations stepped in with a plan that was meant to solve the problem, a plan that aimed to bring peace, but instead, it would open the door to a new and more intense chapter of struggle. The plan was simple in idea, but complex in reality. The land would be divided into two separate states, one for Jewish people and one for Arab people. And Jerusalem, the most sensitive and important city, would not belong fully to either side. It would be placed under international control, protected and managed by the global community. For many Jewish leaders, this plan was accepted, not because it was perfect, but because it offered something they had been waiting for over generations, the chance to finally have a recognized homeland, a place where they could build a nation, protect themselves, and shape their own future without depending on others. But for many Arab leaders and communities, the plan was deeply rejected, not just because of disagreement, but because of the feeling that it was unfair, that it was taking land that they had been living on for generations and dividing it without their full consent, without recognizing their own connection, their own history, and their own right to decide what happens to their home. So now the situation became even more serious, because instead of one shared tension, there were now two clear paths, two different futures, and no agreement between them. The moment the plan was announced, reactions spread quickly, hope for some, anger for others, celebration in one place, protest in another, and the land that had already been tense was now moving towards something much more dangerous. Violence began to grow. Communities that once lived close to each other started to separate. Trust disappeared almost completely. Fear became stronger than ever before. And then came the moment that would define everything that followed. In 1948, the State of Israel was officially declared. For Jewish people, this was a historic moment, something that had not happened for nearly 2,000 years. A return not just in memory, but in reality, a nation reborn, a dream that had survived generations finally becoming real. But for many Arab people, this same moment was seen very differently. It was not a beginning, but a loss, a moment where they felt their land was being taken, where their future was suddenly uncertain, where everything they knew could change overnight. And within hours of this declaration, war began. Neighboring Arab countries entered the conflict, sending armies into the land, believing they needed to act, believing they needed to stop what was happening, believing they were defending something that mattered deeply to them. What followed was not a small conflict. It was a full war, a war that would shape the borders, the lives, and the future of millions. Fighting spread across the land, cities became battlefields, families were forced to leave their homes, some leaving out of fear, some being pushed out, some thinking they would return soon, not knowing that many would never come back. For Israelis, the war was about survival, about protecting a new country that had just been born, about defending a place they believed they had waited centuries to rebuild. For Palestinians, the war became known as a catastrophe, a moment of deep loss, where many lost their homes, their land, and their sense of stability, a moment that would stay in memory for generations. By the time the war ended, the map of the land had changed again. Israel had gained control of more territory than originally planned. Many Palestinian Arabs had become refugees, living in nearby regions, carrying with them memories of homes they left behind. The land was no longer just divided on paper, it was divided in reality, with borders, with separation, with wounds that had not healed. And yet, even after the war ended, the conflict did not disappear. It did not fade away with time. Instead, it became part of everyday life. New conflicts came. New wars followed. In 1967, another major war changed everything again. Israel gained control of more areas, including East Jerusalem, a city that holds deep meaning for all sides, making the situation even more complex, even more sensitive. The more time passed, the more the situation became difficult to solve, because now it was not just about land or borders, it was about people who had grown up in conflict, people whose identities were shaped by loss, fear, and hope, people who had different stories, different experiences, but were living in the same space. Attempts were made to bring peace. Leaders met. Agreements were discussed. Some progress was made, but every time it seemed like things might improve, new challenges appeared, new tensions rose, and the cycle continued. Generations grew up knowing this conflict as part of their reality. Children became adults carrying the same questions their parents once had. Why is this still happening? Why can it not be solved? Why does this land continue to carry so much struggle? Because the truth is, this is not a simple story with a simple ending. This is a story where history, belief, identity, and emotion are all deeply connected, where every decision affects millions, where every step forward is met with challenges, where every attempt at peace requires trust that is very hard to build. And yet, even in the middle of all this, life continues. People continue to live. Families continue to grow. Hope still exists, even when it feels far away. Because no matter how long the conflict has lasted, no matter how deep the division has become, one question still remains in the hearts of many people, not just in this land, but around the world. Is peace still possible? And as this question continues to be asked, as the world continues to watch, the story of this land is not finished. In fact, it is still being written. In fact, it is still being written. Because after the wars, after the borders changed, after the world saw the maps redraw again and again, the reality on the ground did not become simple or peaceful. Instead, it became something much more complicated, something that could not be solved with one agreement, one meeting, or one decision. Because now, the conflict was not just between leaders or armies, it was part of everyday life for millions of people. As the years moved forward, the land became divided in ways that were not always visible on a map, but deeply felt in daily life. Because people were no longer just separated by borders, they were separated by fear, by memory, by stories passed from one generation to the next. Stories of loss, stories of pain, stories of moments that changed everything for their families. In many places, checkpoints appeared, walls were built, security increased, and movement became limited. Not always the same for everyone, but enough to create a sense that life was different depending on where you lived and who you were. And this created a reality where two people could live very close to each other, yet experience completely different lives. For Israelis, security became one of the most important concerns, because they had experienced attacks. They had lived through moments of fear where danger felt very close, and so protection became a priority, something that shaped decisions, something that influenced policies, something that became part of daily thinking. For Palestinians, daily life often became more difficult, not only because of the political situation, but because of restrictions, because of uncertainty, because of the feeling that control over their own lives was limited, and this created frustration, anger, and a deep desire for freedom, for stability, for a future that felt secure. And so the situation became something very difficult to balance, because one side focused on security, the other focused on freedom, and both felt that their needs were real, their concerns were valid, and their voices needed to be heard. Over time, new generations grew up in this environment, children who did not remember a time of peace, children who learned about the conflict not just from books, but from what they saw around them, from what they heard at home, from what they experienced in their daily lives. Some grew up hearing stories of survival, of building a nation against all odds, of protecting what they believed was their rightful home, stories that created a strong sense of identity and purpose. Others grew up hearing stories of displacement, of homes lost, of opportunities limited, of dreams delayed, stories that created a deep sense of injustice and a strong desire for change. And when children grow up with such different experiences, such different understandings of the same land, it becomes harder for them to see each other, not as enemies, but as people with their own fears, their own hopes, their own lives. At different moments in time, there were attempts to change this direction, moments when leaders came together, when the world paid close attention, when hope seemed possible, when people believed that maybe, after all these years, something could finally change. There were agreements signed, promises made, plans created, and for a short time, it felt like progress was being made, like the long story of conflict might finally begin to move toward peace. But peace is not just about agreements on paper. It requires trust. It requires understanding. It requires both sides to believe that the future can be better than the past. And in a place where history carries so much weight, where memories are so strong, building that trust is one of the hardest things to do. Sometimes, just when things seem to improve, something would happen that would bring everything back to tension, a moment of violence, a decision that one side felt was unfair, an action that created new anger, and slowly the progress would begin to fade, replaced again by uncertainty. The cycle continued, hope rising, then falling, attempts made, then challenged, conversations started, then stopped. And through all of this, ordinary people continued to live their lives, trying to find normal moments in a situation that was far from normal. There were people who wanted peace deeply, people who believed that living together was possible, people who worked, spoke, and tried to build bridges, even when it was difficult, even when they faced criticism from their own communities, even when the environment around them made it seem almost impossible. But there were also voices of anger, voices shaped by pain and loss, voices that found it hard to believe in peace after everything that had happened, voices that felt that giving up anything would mean losing too much, losing identity, losing history, losing something that could never be replaced. And so, the land continued to carry both hope and tension at the same time, moments of calm followed by moments of conflict, quiet days followed by sudden changes, a reality where nothing was fully stable, where the future always felt uncertain. The world continued to watch, sometimes closely, sometimes from a distance, sometimes trying to help, sometimes struggling to understand the depth of the situation, because this was not just a conflict with clear sides and simple answers. This was a story built over thousands of years, with layers of history, belief, identity, and emotion that could not be easily separated. Even today, people still ask the same question that has been asked for so long, a question that does not have a simple answer, a question that carries both hope and doubt at the same time. Why is this still happening? Why has this land seen so much struggle for so long? Why is it so hard to find a solution that works for everyone? Because this land is not just about land, it is about meaning, it is about identity, it is about history that people carry inside them. And when something becomes part of who you are, it becomes very difficult to let go, very difficult to change, very difficult to share in a way that feels fair to everyone. And yet, even in all this complexity, even in all the difficulty, one truth remains. People on both sides are still living, still hoping, still wanting a future where life is not defined by conflict, where children can grow without fear, where the story of this land can finally move in a different direction. But that future has not fully arrived yet, because the story is still continuing, because new moments are still being added, because new challenges are still appearing, and because the next part of this story is happening right now. Because the next part of this story is happening right now, it is not something far away in history books. It is not something that only belongs to the past. It is something people are living through every single day, something that affects how they wake up in the morning, how they move, how they think about the future, and how they understand the world around them. In this land, life is not only shaped by normal things like work, school, family, and daily routines. It is also shaped by uncertainty, by moments that can change quickly, by a feeling that peace is not fully stable, that calm can turn into tension without much warning, and that the future is never completely clear. For many people living in Israel, daily life includes a strong focus on safety, because over the years there have been moments of sudden violence, attacks that created fear and loss, and this has led to a system where security is part of everyday life, where people are always aware, always prepared, always thinking about protection, not just for themselves, but for their families, their communities, and their country. This feeling is not always visible on the surface. People go to work, they study, they spend time with friends, they try to live normal lives, but underneath there is often a layer of awareness, a quiet understanding that things can change, that safety is something that cannot be taken for granted. For many Palestinians, daily life carries a different kind of challenge, one that is not always about sudden danger, but about ongoing limitation, about movement that is not always free, about decisions that are not always in their control, about opportunities that can feel restricted. And this creates a different kind of pressure, a different kind of struggle that shapes how people see their future. For some, simple things like traveling, working, or even planning ahead can become more complicated, not impossible, but more difficult than in many other parts of the world. And over time, this creates frustration, a feeling that life is not fully open, that possibilities are not always equal, that something is holding them back. And when people live with these experiences for many years, when they grow up seeing the same challenges again and again, it begins to shape how they think, how they feel, and how they understand the situation they are part of. One side may see security as necessary, something that protects lives, something that prevents harm, something that must be strong to keep people safe. The other side may see the same system as restriction, as control, as something that limits freedom and makes life harder, something that needs to change so people can live more fully. Both views come from real experiences. Both views come from real feelings. And this is what makes the situation so difficult, because it is not only about facts, it is about how people live those facts every day, how they feel them, how they carry them inside. At the same time, the world outside this land is also watching more closely than ever before, because in today's world, information travels fast, news spreads quickly, and people everywhere can see what is happening, sometimes in real time, sometimes from different perspectives, sometimes with strong opinions, sometimes with confusion. Different countries have different views. Different people support different sides, and this turns the situation into something bigger than just a local conflict. It becomes a global conversation, something discussed in homes, in schools, in media, something that reaches far beyond the borders of the land itself. But inside the land, for the people living there, The experience is not about global debates, it is about daily life, about waking up each day and trying to find stability, trying to build something meaningful, trying to create a future even when the present feels uncertain. There are families on both sides who want the same simple things: safety, opportunity, education for their children, a chance to live without fear, a chance to move forward without always looking back at conflict. There are people who speak about peace, who believe that understanding is possible, who try to connect with others across the divide, who believe that even after everything, there is still a path forward. But there are also deep wounds, memories that are not easy to forget, moments of loss that shape how people see the world, experiences that make trust difficult, because trust requires feeling safe, and when safety is uncertain, trust becomes fragile. And so the situation continues, not always the same, sometimes more calm, sometimes more tense, sometimes moving slightly forward, sometimes stepping back again, a constant movement that never fully settles. In recent years, technology and media have made the situation even more visible, because now people around the world can see images, videos, and stories almost instantly, and this can create strong reactions, strong emotions, strong opinions, sometimes without full understanding of the deeper history, the long story behind what is being shown. This creates another layer of complexity, because now the conflict is not only happening on the ground, it is also happening in the way it is seen, the way it is shared, the way it is understood by people who are far away but still feel connected to it. And yet, even in this complex situation, life continues in quiet ways that are not always shown. People celebrating small moments, children going to school, families sharing meals, friends meeting, people trying to create normal life, even when the situation around them is not normal. These moments may seem small, but they are important, because they show that even in conflict, human life continues, hope continues, and the desire for something better does not disappear. At the same time, the political situation remains complicated, with leaders making decisions, with negotiations happening at different times, with plans being discussed, with international involvement trying to find solutions. But none of these efforts have fully resolved the deeper issues, because the deeper issues are not only about land or borders, they are about identity, about history, about who people believe they are, and what they believe they deserve. And when these things are involved, solutions become more than just agreements. They require understanding, empathy, and time. A lot of time. And still, the question remains. The same question that has been asked for so long, the same question that continues to appear again and again. Can this ever truly be resolved? Can there be a future where both sides feel secure, where both sides feel respected, where both sides feel that they have a place, a future, a sense of belonging? Or will this land continue to carry its long history of conflict into the future? No one can answer this with certainty. But one thing is clear: the story is not finished, because new events are still happening, new generations are still growing, new voices are still rising, and the next part of this story will depend on what happens next. And the next part of this story will depend on what happens next, because even after so many years, after so many moments of hope and disappointment, after so many attempts to change the direction of this land, the future is still not clear. It is still open, still uncertain, still waiting to be shaped by decisions that have not yet been made, and by people who are still growing up inside this story. One of the most powerful things about this land is that it does not only carry the past, it carries expectations about the future. And these expectations are not always the same for everyone, because different people imagine different outcomes, different solutions, different ways forward, and sometimes these ideas are very far from each other. Some people believe that the only way forward is through complete separation, two states, two clear borders, two independent futures, where each side can live in its own space, build its own system, and move forward without constant conflict. A solution that has been discussed for many years, supported by many, but also challenged by realities on the ground that make it difficult to fully achieve. Others believe that separation is no longer possible, that the land has become too connected, too mixed, too complex for a clean division, and instead they imagine a shared future, one state where people of different backgrounds live together, equal in rights, equal in opportunities, building a new identity that goes beyond the divisions of the past. An idea that sounds hopeful but also raises many questions about how it would work in reality. There are also those who feel that neither solution fully protects what matters most to them, people who fear losing identity, losing control, losing something that cannot be replaced, and this creates resistance to change, a hesitation to accept solutions that might feel uncertain or risky. And so the future remains open, not because there are no ideas, but because there is no agreement, no shared vision that everyone feels comfortable with, no clear path that all sides are ready to follow. At the same time, the world around this land continues to change. New global challenges appear, new political realities develop, new technologies shape how people communicate and understand each other, and all of this affects how the situation evolves. Because this land does not exist in isolation, it is connected to a wider world that influences it in many ways. Young people are growing up in a very different world compared to previous generations. They have access to more information, more perspectives, more voices, and this can create both opportunity and confusion, because while they can learn more, they are also exposed to many different opinions, some of which are strong, emotional, and not always balanced. Some young people are starting to ask new questions, questions that go beyond old narratives, questions about coexistence, about understanding, about whether the cycle of conflict can be broken, about whether a different future is possible. Others, however, grow up with the same fears, the same stories of loss, the same sense of division, and for them, the future feels like a continuation of the past, not something new, not something different. And this creates a kind of split, not just between groups, but within generations, where different people see the future in very different ways, even when they live in the same place. Another important part of the future is the role of leadership, because decisions made by leaders can shape the direction of the land, can open doors to peace or close them, can create opportunities or deepen divisions, and this makes leadership a powerful factor in what comes next. But leadership is not only about governments or political figures, it is also about ordinary people, about how individuals choose to see each other, how they choose to speak, how they choose to respond to challenges, because even small actions can influence the larger environment over time. There are people who work quietly to build connections, to create understanding, to bring people together in ways that are not always visible in the news. People who believe that change does not only come from big agreements, but from small human moments, from conversations, from shared experiences, from seeing each other not as enemies, but as people. These efforts may seem small compared to the scale of the conflict, but they are important because they show that even in a difficult situation, there are still choices, still possibilities, still paths that can be explored. At the same time, there are ongoing challenges that make the future uncertain, issues that have not been fully resolved, questions about borders, about control, about rights, about recognition, questions that require careful thinking, patience, and willingness from all sides to engage in difficult conversations. And yet, despite all the complexity, despite all the uncertainty, one thing remains true. People still want a future, where life is not defined by conflict, where children can grow without fear, where families can plan their lives without constant uncertainty, where the land can be known for something other than struggle. This desire is not always loud, it is not always visible, but it exists, quietly, deeply, in many people, a hope that after everything that has happened, after everything that has been lost, something better can still be created. But hope alone is not enough. It needs action. It needs courage. It needs people willing to move beyond fear, beyond anger, beyond the idea that nothing can change. And this is where the future becomes a question, not just for leaders, not just for those directly involved, but for everyone who watches, everyone who learns, everyone who tries to understand this story. Because understanding is the first step. Understanding how complex this situation is. Understanding how deep the history goes. Understanding how human the experiences are on both sides. And when people begin to understand, not just judge, not just react, but truly understand, it opens a small possibility, a small space where something new can begin. The story of this land has been shaped by thousands of years of history, by moments of power and loss, by faith and identity, by conflict and hope, and now, the next chapter is not yet written. It is waiting. Waiting for decisions, waiting for change, waiting for something different. And maybe, just maybe, the future will not be the same as the past. Maybe it will move in a new direction. Maybe it will take time. Maybe it will be difficult. But the possibility still exists. Because as long as people are still asking questions, still searching for answers, still hoping for something better, the story is not over. And the final chapter has not yet been written. And the final chapter has not yet been written because, unlike many stories that begin, rise, and end with a clear conclusion, this story continues to move forward, shaped not only by history, not only by decisions made in the past, but by every moment that is happening right now, by every choice that is made today, and by every generation that will come after this one. This land has seen more than most places in the world. It has seen empires rise with power and fall into memory. It has seen people arrive with hope and leave with loss. It has seen moments of deep faith and moments of deep conflict. And through all of this, it has remained the same land, carrying different meanings for different people, holding stories that do not always match, but still exist together in one place. For some, this land represents return, a return to something that was never forgotten, a return to identity, to safety, to a place that feels like home, after a long history of not having one, a place where survival turned into strength, and strength turned into a nation that continues to grow and change. For others, this land represents loss, a loss of home, of land, of stability, a moment in history that changed everything and never fully healed, a feeling that something important was taken, something that cannot easily be replaced, something that still lives in memory, in stories, in the way people understand their past and imagine their future. And when one place carries both return and loss at the same time, when one land holds both hope and pain in equal strength, it becomes more than just a place on a map. It becomes a symbol of how complex human history can be, how deeply people can connect to land, and how difficult it can be to find a path that feels fair to everyone. The story is not only about leaders or governments or borders, it is about people, ordinary people who wake up each day and try to live their lives, who try to find moments of peace in a situation that is often uncertain, who try to build something meaningful even when the ground beneath them feels unstable. There are parents who want their children to grow up without fear, who want them to focus on learning, on dreaming, on building a future that is not shaped by conflict, but by opportunity. There are young people who are tired of the same cycle, who look at the past and wonder if the future must always be the same, who ask questions that challenge old ideas, who imagine a different reality, even if they are not sure how to reach it. There are also those who feel that the past cannot be forgotten, that history must be protected, that identity must remain strong, that any change must not come at the cost of losing what defines them, and this creates a tension between holding on and moving forward, between protecting and changing. And this tension exists on all sides, in different forms, in different ways, but always present, always influencing how people think, how they feel, and how they act. The world continues to watch this land, sometimes closely, sometimes from a distance, sometimes with strong opinions, sometimes with confusion, because the story is not simple. It does not have one clear perspective. It does not fit into easy explanations. It is a story with many layers, many voices, many truths that exist at the same time, sometimes supporting each other, sometimes conflicting with each other, creating a reality that is difficult to fully understand without looking deeply, without listening carefully, without trying to see beyond one side. And maybe this is one of the most important parts of this story. That understanding requires effort, it requires patience. It requires the willingness to accept that not everything can be explained in simple terms, that not everything can be solved quickly, that some things take time, sometimes a very long time, but even in a story that has lasted for thousands of years, time continues to move forward. New chapters continue to be written, new possibilities continue to appear, even if they are small, even if they are fragile, even if they are not yet strong enough to change everything. Because change does not always come in one big moment. Sometimes it comes slowly, step by step, through small actions, through quiet decisions, through moments that do not seem important at the time, but become meaningful later. There are people who believe that peace is still possible, not because the situation is easy, but because they believe that continuing the same cycle will not bring a different result, that something must change, that something must be done differently, even if it is difficult, even if it requires courage. There are also people who feel that peace is too far away, that the challenges are too deep, that the differences are too strong, that the trust needed for peace is too fragile, and for them, the future feels uncertain, not hopeful, not clear. And between these two feelings, hope and doubt, the story continues to move, not in a straight line, but in a complex path that changes over time, sometimes moving forward, sometimes staying still, sometimes moving backward. The land itself remains the same hills, the same cities, the same sky, but the meaning of the land continues to evolve, shaped by the people who live on it, by the stories they carry, by the choices they make. And maybe the most powerful question is not only about the past or the present, but about the future, about what kind of story will be written next, about whether the next chapter will continue the same pattern or begin something new. Will the next generation see the same conflict, the same division, the same struggle, or will they see something different, something that moves beyond what has been before, something that creates a new direction? No one can answer this with certainty, because the future is not fixed. It is shaped by actions, by decisions, by the willingness of people to imagine something different and to work toward it, even when it is difficult. But one thing is clear: the story of this land has never been simple, and it will not become simple overnight. It will require time, understanding, patience, and effort from many sides, from many people, from many perspectives. And as this story continues, as new moments are added, as new voices are heard, one truth remains at the center of it all. This is not just a story about land, it is a story about people. It is a story about identity. It is a story about belief. It is a story about what happens when history, emotion, and hope all come together in one place. And most importantly, it is a story that is still being written, not finished, not complete, still moving, still changing, still waiting for its final ending. And maybe, one day, that ending will not be about conflict, but about understanding, not about division, but about coexistence, not about loss, but about a shared future that respects the past while building something new. Until that day comes, the world will keep watching, people will keep asking questions, and this land will continue to hold one of the most powerful stories ever told. A story that began thousands of years ago and still has no end. And now, you understand something most people never take the time to truly see. This is not just a story about a place. It is a story about people, about memories that never fade, about beliefs that never disappear, and about a land that carries more emotion than most of the world combined. For thousands of years, this land has been fought over, protected, lost, and rebuilt again and again. And even today, it continues to shape conversations, decisions, and emotions across the entire world. But maybe the most important question is not only about the past. Maybe the real question is about the future. What happens next? Will this story continue the same way? Or will something finally change? Will future generations grow up hearing the same stories of conflict? Or will they create a new story of understanding? That answer has not been written yet. And maybe it depends on the people who are living today. If you watch this video until the end, it means you care about understanding the world, not just seeing it. And that already makes you different from most people. So now, I want to ask you something. What do you think about this story? Do you think peace is possible one day? Write your thoughts in the comments, because your voice matters, and every perspective adds something valuable to the conversation. And before you leave, tell me, where are you watching this from? And what time is it in your city right now? If you want to improve your English while learning powerful real stories like this, make sure you subscribe to Storyglow and Grow English. Because here, we don't just learn English. We understand the world through stories. And remember, some stories end, but the most powerful ones stay with us forever.